Hello, Gladius here, bringing you the complete DrRatio guide. DrRatio is an imaginary hunt DPS character that specializes in single target damage. He is quite different than the two limited hunt characters that came before him. He brings less complexities and more raw power. In this video, we'll discuss his kit, how to optimize his build with Lightcones and Relics, and formulate a team where DrRatio can fulfill his best role. Without further ado, let's get right into it. DrRatio has a simple kit and very easy to understand if we start from his talent. His talent is where all his power lies, a huge single target multiplier that is classified as follow-up attack. His whole kit revolves around triggering this follow-up attack, and there's two main ways to do so. The first way to trigger his talent is that every time DrRatio casts his skill, he has a 40% fixed chance to trigger his follow-up attack. Note that it's a fixed chance, not a base chance, means it will not be affected by enemies' effect resistance, nor can you improve your chances by stacking effect hit rate. What DrRatio can do to improve this chance to 100% is to cast a skill on debuffed enemies. For each debuff the enemy has, you have a 20% increased fixed chance to trigger this talent. The enemy needs to have a minimum of 3 debuffs for DrRatio to guarantee his talent on skill cast. This is also very important as his talent follow-up attack is the majority of his damage output. Having it miss would be pretty devastating. DrRatio's ultimate is a single target ability that has a low multiplier on cast, but instead it afflicts one enemy with a debuff called Wise Man's Folly. When such a target is attacked by any of his allies, DrRatio's talent will be immediately triggered on the target. Wise Man's Folly can be triggered up to 2 times. DrRatio's basic attack doesn't do anything special, and it doesn't contribute triggering his talent in any way. When you tally up all of DrRatio's multipliers, this is what you get. 2/3 of his damage comes from the talent follow-up attack, and the rest from his skill and ultimate base multipliers. And because his basic attack doesn't trigger his talent at all, we want to avoid using it if possible. Real quick, I'll go over trace priority. DrRatio have very important ascension traces, you want to pick them up immediately. They are massive boosts to his stats when attacking debuff enemies. His other traces are very polarizing. You want to give priority to maxing out his talent as soon as possible, then leveling all his attack percent and crit rate traces as well. Only with the leftover trace materials, you can put into the skill and ultimate. They have way less impact comparatively. You can leave his basic attack at level 1 even, it won't make a difference. DrRatio have a fairly balanced stat line. He gets decent attack percent, damage boost, crit rate and crit damage from his own traces. When building his relic main stats and substats, we'll resort to a very conventional and familiar setup. For chest piece, you want crit rate or crit damage. Aim for an ideal 1:2 ratio in tandem with your Lightcone trace or relic substats. For boots, you'll be looking for speed boots. For a hunt character, he doesn't have high base speed. He starts at 103 and doesn't get any from the traces. Even with speed boots, you still want 3 speed substats to reach that ideal 134 for MOC cycles. Attack percent boots are usable as well, it's not that far behind speed boots. For sphere, imaginary damage bonus will be slightly better than attack percent, but not enough to ignore substats. Pick a sphere with better substats will be optimal. For rope, attack percent is the way to go, energy regeneration is nowhere nearly as good. DrRatio's balanced stat line makes every relic main stat piece feel very impactful and important, and that translates to his substats as well. For substats, it's pretty conventional as well. You'll be aiming for as much crit rate and crit damage while having that 134 speed or more. Then from that point, you'll be getting as much attack percent and speed as possible. You do not need to specifically build effect hit rate though, as the only benefit is to improve his chance for his technique slow and a minor debuff from his traces, both of which isn't a big deal. Now let's talk about relic set bonuses themselves. For planet ornaments, you really only have 4 choices. Given you meet all the activation requirements, I would say you can go with any of the 4. Go with a set with good substats, and of course the right main stats. For the outer relic pieces, the best in slot will be the imaginary set, followed by the 4-piece quantum set. Now, because DrRatio wants debuffers on the team to fulfill his maximum potential, it's likely that you can slot in defense shredders like Silverwolf or Pella. Quantum set begins to have a huge upside potential when you start stacking defense shred. DrRatio is mainly a follow-up attacker. He's got extra options when it comes to 2-piece combinations when it comes to set bonuses. You got the 20% follow-up attack damage, you got all the 12% attack options, you have 10% imaginary damage boost, and you have the 6% speed. Getting 4-piece set bonuses can be difficult or even resin inefficient. You can just go for a 2-piece combination and call it a day. Next, we'll talk about Lightcone options for DrRatio. We'll be looking for his best options with 5 stars at S1 and 4 stars at S5, and see how they compare. DrRatio have a niche of being a follow-up attacker, so the more conventional hunt Lightcones doesn't perform as well as they normally would. Swordplay is also hard to stack up, with all of DrRatio's multiplier being single hits, not to mention the hard reset when you have to swap targets. DrRatio would otherwise have very poor free-to-play Lightcone options, but the Herda Shop Lightcone cruising in the Stellar Sea comes to our rescue. It performs so well, being a Lightcone you can easily max superimpose over time. It is well ahead of other free-to-play friendly options and only 14% behind his signature Lightcone. Topaz's signature Lightcone is very good on DrRatio, even helps him get one more debuff. But perhaps it's smarter to have Topaz use this Lightcone and be ran alongside DrRatio for the best results. His signature Lightcone, Baptism of Pure Thought, will be his best in slot, mainly from providing damage boost and defense shred on all his follow-up attacks. Defense shred is very valuable when you start stacking it, and for DrRatio you'll find out his best team setup tend to have defense shreds due to his desire for enemies to be debuffed. Because of how well cruising in the Stellar Sea performs and how easily it can be obtained in the Herda Shop, I highly recommend it over pretty much everything else. DrRatio is actually very straightforward when building him and playing him. But when it comes to team building, we do have to be mindful of a few things. DrRatio operates at the highest efficiency when you can apply 5 debuffs to his attack target. Okay, at bare minimum, he wants 3 debuffs to even function properly. This is not overly difficult as he have 1 debuff himself and up to 2, but you still want to be mindful and even aim for that 5 debuff if you can. Now, a conventional hypercarry setup with DrRatio doing all the team's damage has its limits. While it is superb for single target damage, it will feel very sluggish trying to clear multi-target waves, as he doesn't have any AoE damage in his kit. So when we're looking for his best supportive teammates, we also have to consider if they can assist him in AoE situations. When we're finding DrRatio's teammates, we have to assess them in 3 factors. First, how well they can put up debuffs on enemies. Second, how much damage boost they're providing for DrRatio and other allies. And finally, how much AoE or blast damage they can output themselves to help out with wave clears. Firstly, we'll look at his best dual DPS partners that provide nice AoE damage. To no surprise, we have Erudition, Nihility, and Destruction characters. Characters of every path have their unique benefits. Erudition will be flat out the best AoE damage dealer, while Nihility characters support him with extra debuffs and moderate AoE damage. And Destruction characters have the strongest 3-target damage, also being the most skill point friendly. I especially like Welt here. Not only does he provide 2 extra debuffs, he also imprisons enemy, making your imaginary set bonus all the more consistent. And the cherry on top is that he actually do okay AoE damage as well. And in case you didn't know, imprisonment from different sources do count as separate debuffs and can be stacked. This includes imaginary break imprisonment as well. Now if we look at support characters for DrRatio, we mainly have to look at their debuff potential and how much damage boost they can provide DrRatio and his potential DPS partner. Every support have their unique strength, and there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to DrRatio teams. Silverwolf is the best debuffer, ruanmei is the best team damage buffer, and Topaz is the strongest single target dealer and damage booster, while Gwyneth is a nice balance of everything. When you put the 2 and 2 together, you can give everything DrRatio wants to perform optimally in a team setting. It's impossible to list all the possible team builds, but a few examples of team structures are the hypercarry setup with DrRatio doing all the damage. Then we have the dual DPS setup, which is less impressive on paper, but is very versatile hopping into different content. And finally, my favorite, a highly consistent mono imaginary team enabled by Silverwolf. This is a team where you can queue up into any content blindfolded, mimicking the consistency of mono quantum team. Let's talk about Eidolons. Eidolons doesn't really change how DrRatio play or make up for the lack of AoE damage, but accumulatively through Eidolon 1 and 6, he gets crazy improvement for his single target damage, something he already does really well. DrRatio has 3 really good Eidolons that work on top of each other, that being 2, the 4, and the 6. Through the power of exponential growth, accumulatively DrRatio have the biggest margin of increase from 1 to 6. That being said though, at the end, he is just a single target damage dealer. I feel like going for Eidolons is really overkill for the current state of the endgame, which doesn't necessitate all that much single target damage, or difficult for that matter. In summary, I do think DrRatio is a very strong single target hunt character that we can get for free in patch 1.6. I do think he's worth your investment. You'll have a strong imaginary DPS at your disposal to tackle tanky enemies in the endgame. Alright, that concludes my complete guide for DrRatio. Stay tuned for my next guide by subscribing. My name is Gladius. Thank you for watching. Until next time.
Just as my calculations predicted. An interesting test of intellect.